Thank you. Okay. So this presentation is about the benefits of natural healthy floodplains in Kansas and both how we can um, continue to preserve those benefits as well as mimic their benefits in developed areas, places uh, that have already been um, that have already been damaged uh, or are no longer wild wooded floodplains. So, my name is Keegan Schwartz. I'm the floodplain outreach specialist with the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. Uh, my goals with not just this presentation, but my position with KDA in general is to help Kansans better understand their native floodplains, streams and rivers, and riparian ecosystems. Um, I enjoy teaching flood safety both to kids and adults. Uh, And I want to share my passion for my home state with other Kansans, native born or otherwise. Um, Sorry, excuse me, there's some background noise real quick. Let me just. Sorry about that. The air conditioner in this building is very loud. All right, so don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need anything. I have my email address here, uh, and um, I'm happy to help answer questions if need be. Uh, or, if I can't help you, I can always get you to someone who can. All right, so the goals of this workshop are we are going to learn about types of floodplain ecosystems, the benefits of natural floodplains, um, nature-based flood and erosion prevention, and we're going to discuss ways that we can help preserve floodplains, both as a community and as individuals. Uh, we're also going to talk about large-scale community efforts and small-scale individual efforts to practice nature-based flood and erosion management. Again, things that we can do as a community, things like rewilding areas, preserving recreation area alongside streams and using that um, as a natural floodplain area, and even as individuals, things like a rain garden in our yard, or if you have property along a river or a stream, letting some wild plants grow instead of clear cutting. That helps prevent things like erosion, helps prevent flood from taking out giant chunks of land. As someone who's lived by a river, I've seen that. Um, and we're going to try to think about of the examples that we go over, which of them will work the best in Kansas, because we have some different biomes here. It's more wooded on the eastern side, more flat on the western side. Um, and we're going to consider what will work best, not just in Kansas, but in our specific corner of Kansas. So, for context, floodplains are the generally flat areas adjacent to rivers and streams, in case you didn't know that. I'm sure you did. Um, but we have floodplains are prone to flooding and are often submerged by floodwaters. They're generally composed of fertile silt, sand, clay, and gravel deposited by flooding rivers. Historically, floodplains have been at the center of civilization due to rich substrate deposited by floodwaters. If you remember back in school learning about the Nile and the Tigris and the Euphrates, the whole reason civilization thrived so well along them was because the rivers would flood and deposit fertile soil. But many waterways in the US don't often overflow to fill the floodplain the way they used to, thanks to human intervention in the forms of levees, dredging, channelization, etc. But those vegetated areas alongside rivers do still have value today, even if they've been modified by humans. We can benefit from preserving and restoring these natural floodways, as well as mimicking their conditions on a smaller scale. So, floodplains and riparian ecosystems. We have riparian forests, wetland riparian areas, and playas in Kansas. These are generally our biggest our biggest natural floodplain areas. So, for context, in case you didn't know, riparian environments are the natural areas alongside bodies of water. So, generally, it's usually used to refer to alongside rivers, but it means any body of water. So riverine ecosystems are specific to rivers, and lacustrine ecosystems are associated with lakes. Both can be considered riparian. Riparian ecosystems have soil made up largely of nutrient-rich sediments, high in organic matter. The trees, bushes, forbs, and grasses growing in these areas are generally flood tolerant and better suited for growing in damp environments than other plants in the region. Because of these unique growing conditions, riparian environments will often create small pocket ecosystems, ecologically referred to as mycosites, where unique flora and fauna can thrive. Um, if anyone has ever been to uh, oh, let me think. I remember there's a lot of spots around Wichita, pretty much anywhere in central or eastern Kansas where you'll be in the middle of a field and there's a wooded area just right alongside the river. Those wooded areas have different plants and animals that you might not find anywhere else. There are insects and invertebrates, snails, and stuff like that that are technically not even meant to be this far west, but you will find them in small pockets in those little wooded areas. Riparian forests. This photo here was taken at Kanza Prairie Nature Trail. This is a dry stream bed. This is a riparian forest that is a bit unique in that it's not always alongside water. This, because all of Kanza Prairie is a series of watersheds, there is a lot of water flowing in the damp season, and it tends to dry up when it's drier, when it's hotter out. So these riparian forests are the primary type of forest in Kansas. Most of the state is too dry to sustain large forests, as well as being too rocky. The limestone soil isn't super suitable for deep-rooted trees, but we do have things like cottonwood that tend to thrive out here. Um, so our state's native trees, again, things like cottonwoods, hackberry, bur oak, post oak, they tend to thrive in these bodies of water and in the damp valleys between hills. Again, in this picture, this is a narrow valley in between the hills at Kanza. So these forests, the ones that are long, narrow, like hallway shaped, are called gallery forests. They can form alongside water or wetlands, creating narrow corridors of trees in otherwise sparsely wooded regions. And aside from providing great habitat for wildlife, these forests serve as windbreaks and erosion control for the surrounding area. We'll get into this a bit later, but these plants do also filter the water. So the fact that they thrive so well alongside this running water is uh, is beneficial to the areas downstream. We get less sediment, we get less pollution, etc. Wetland riparian areas. So those of us in eastern Kansas live near the Baker wetlands. A little further west, we have Cheyenne Bottoms. We do have, it's not super common in Kansas, but we do have wetlands here. Um, Wetlands are a area saturated with or submerged beneath still or relatively slow-moving water with enough frequency to support vegetation suited to amphibious or semi-aquatic conditions. So examples of wetlands includes bogs, swamps, and marshes. A bog is a wetland that accumulates deposited vegetative material as peat. Bogs are typically acidic, anaerobic, and high in tannins, which give the water a dark tea-like color. We don't really have those in Kansas, but they're still a very key type of wetland that's useful to know about. Swamps are wooded wetlands that consist of standing water and or soil that remains saturated water year-round. We don't really have a lot of big swamps in Kansas. We might have some little pocket ones in those riparian forests that are wooded and grow some wetland plants, but they're not common here. Marshes, however, we do have a good amount of. A marsh wetland is generally populated by herbaceous plants, things like grasses, sedges, and forbs, which are woody plants smaller than bushes. Um, they're perpetually or frequently flooded by nearby sources of moving water. They're a great place for wildlife. If you've ever been out to visit any local marsh or wetland in Kansas, you'll notice that there are tons and tons of bird species that you won't see anywhere else. Um, all of these wetlands can be found alongside rivers, dominating healthy, frequently inundated floodplains. Most of Kansas's wetlands are marshes or playas, but small swamps can be found in wooded parts of the state as well, particularly along the eastern border. High Plains playas. You'll find these out west and up north. Wherever it's flat and grassy, these tend to be a lot more common. They're shallow depressions in the earth that collect water from rain and runoff and retain it, which allow that water to slowly evaporate, to be taken up by plants, or just sink down into the soil. Playas retain water much longer than other environments common in Kansas, such as the semi-arid shortgrass prairies and farmland that dominate much of the western half of the state. Excuse me. Uh, Playas do provide important habitat for migrating waterfowl and native amphibians. Um, Things, uh, excuse me, sorry. Frogs and frogs and salamanders. Um, they need a body of water to lay their spawn, and in places where the rivers dry up quickly, playas can serve a nice purpose for that. Um, while not necessarily found exclusively within floodplains, playas are common within them and are beneficial in flood prevention and groundwater absorption, both in and out of the floodplain. All right, so now we're moving past the context stage and into the benefits of these floodplain areas. So, maintaining healthy floodplains has both loss reduction and wildlife conservation benefits. So, in terms of loss reduction, we have water retention and storage. Playas, again, are a good example of that. Flow regulation is excellent in wetlands uh, and places where the waterways are more heavily planted, um, and groundwater absorption. And then we have wildlife conservation. This can be less of a priority to communities who are struggling actively with flood issues, but they are a secondary benefit of maintaining these healthy floodplains. If you do if you do floodplain um the floodplain conservation, you can see wildlife benefits as well. So we have water quality improvement, habitat protection, and then recreation opportunities. Because the land right alongside rivers is not often very useful for development, one way that communities can put that land to use for our purposes is recreation, hiking, kayaking, fishing, hunting. Um, that's a great human-centric use for that sort of land. So, water retention and storage. When water levels are high due to extreme rainfall or snowmelt upstream, streams and rivers can overflow. Floodplains provide a place for this water to go, where it can be stored and slowly released back into the stream, absorbed into the ground, evaporated, or taken up by plants. One thing that is important to note is when this water is absorbed into the ground as it is held in place, once the stream level goes down, that groundwater can seep back into the flowing water. So instead of the rivers being very, very high during periods of high rainfall and then completely dry when it's dry, they are more regulated. They have kind of a better in-between state. Excess water entering streams results in exponentially higher water levels downstream, which can cause structure damage, injury, or even loss of life. If this water can be temporarily withheld in floodplains upstream, damage can be significantly reduced downstream. I'm sure many of you may have experienced this on a smaller scale in instances such as someone upstream in the watershed of you put in a big parking lot. There's a store up there now. And now the runoff is a lot worse. The fields behind certain houses fill up quicker. It's just because that water runs off so much faster, doesn't have time to sit and absorb into the ground. And that scales up. Here's a fact I got from FEMA website, which I have cited at the end of this presentation if you're interested in reading it yourself. 1 acre of floodplain flooded 1 foot deep holds approximately 330,000 gallons of water. Upstream floodplain storage can have significant impact on flood damage prevention downstream if enough land is set aside to be flooded and hold on to that flood water during high water events. Flow regulation. So, floodplains regulate the flow of water into lakes and streams. Floodplains, especially those populated with native plants suited to their habitat, they help to slow the rate of rainwater runoff reaching a watershed's main water body. Um, they prevent excessive bank erosion, stream bed degradation or lowering, and sedimentation of downstream lakes, reservoirs, estuaries, and dams. Uh, Sedimentation can be a pretty big issue in a lot of our reservoirs, especially when we have these extremely powerful storms that cause a lot of erosion. Regulated flow of streams and rivers by floodplains does reduce stress on reservoirs, dams, and levees. It reduces the necessity for things like dredging projects when sedimentation gets bad. Um, Groundwater absorption. So, water retained in floodplains has time to slowly seep into the groundwater. As briefly mentioned before, less water flowing directly into those water bodies means less water contributing to those annual flood peaks. Groundwater near water bodies does slowly re-enter lakes and streams during dry spells and periods of low water levels. That contributes to having a stable stream. We don't have the streams that sink down to basically nothing during our dry seasons quite as much. Withheld water that enters groundwater does help to recharge aquifers as well, which is especially important in places like western Kansas, which are beginning to experience pretty extreme groundwater shortages in some areas. I have a map here of aquifer depletion across the western part of the state. Um, this map is from 2015 to 2017, so it's a bit old, but it is a very good visual. Uh, Aquifer depletion is becoming a serious problem in much of western Kansas. Part of that is the drought conditions causing a necessity for more groundwater overuse. We're seeing more water drawn up from the ground than can be absorbed into it. And again, those drought conditions exacerbate that issue of groundwater overuse because there's not enough water coming down. So there's less rain, more farmers have to draw up more water for irrigation, and hard, dry soil creates faster runoff and poor absorption. As I mentioned, that example with the parking lot. Very hard, dry, packed soil behaves very similarly to asphalt. If you've ever forgotten to water a houseplant for too long, you might notice that the soil becomes rock hard. That's just kind of a small example, but again, these things scale up. When the when these drought conditions are extreme, it causes faster runoff, more flooding, and of course, poor groundwater absorption. Floodplains offer a place for that water to pause and slowly soak into the ground, which helps to recharge these aquifers. Let's see here. Ah, all right. Sorry, my keyboard was being slow there. All right, water quality improvement. I did mention this briefly earlier. Many aquatic and amphibious plants that live in still or slow-moving water are excellent at cleaning their environment. Chemical pollutants and heavy metals present in water that is stored in floodplains have time to be filtered out by the plants living there. The vegetation present in the floodplain also acts as a physical filter for soil, sand, and silt that is washed downhill, preventing the bank from eroding into the water. The decomposing organic matter retained by floodplain vegetation acts as a carbon sink, which prevents excessive carbon dioxide from entering the water and atmosphere by capturing it in fertile soil that nurtures the next generation of floodplain vegetation. This also helps prevent things like giant algal blooms. Shallow waters, wet mud, and sandbars in and around streams and rivers support native freshwater mussels, which are also incredible at filtering water. And their population has been struggling quite a bit lately, in part due to our zebra mussels. They compete for habitat. Um, and I'm sure no one likes zebra mussels here if you've ever accidentally stepped on one. One thing that is not directly related, but interesting to mention that proves the point, this background plant that I've chosen for this image is cattail, which historically has been an edible plant. Cattail is so good at absorbing pollutants from its environment that if it is growing in an unclean environment, it can almost become poisonous. It absorbs toxins and holds onto them so well that you cannot then eat them. So things like these wetland plants are excellent for water cleaning. Habitat protection. Um, Floodplains provide a valuable habitat for native flora and fauna. I have an image here of a bald eagle on the bottom. If any of you have noticed in the past decade or so, it does seem like our bald eagles are doing a lot better. Part of that being a decrease in the pesticides that were harming them. But you'll see them around bodies of water because they do love fishing. Uh, Having measures that protect our native floodplains help protect these sort of species. Many native plant species adept at living alongside bodies of water have great difficulty surviving elsewhere. These native plants also often have a symbiotic relationship with local fauna, either as a habitat or a food source. Many birds and insects will have a plant that is their host plant. If you ever have noticed butterflies that are named after trees, like a hackberry butterfly, or even monarchs and their milkweed, many insects native to our prairies have a single plant that hosts them. A lot of these plants rely on things like vegetated floodplains to thrive. Without those floodplains, we lose things like our native butterflies. And if no floodplain is present for these plants to live in, significant biodiversity can be lost. The shallow water, seasonal ponds, and damp soil present in these floodplains provide valuable shelter for young fish and small fish species. These habitats also provide a place for native fish and amphibians to spawn. We do have fish stocking from our hatcheries for things like recreational species, but there are small fish species that don't get that treatment, that need places to spawn for their population to thrive. Migratory birds and waterfowl rest, feed, and breed in floodplains and wetlands. These environments are imperative to their life cycle and the livelihood of many different species of birds. Again, bald eagles, not waterfowl, but they eat fish. They need floodplains in order to thrive. And recreation opportunities. Here are some photos from Friends of the Caw. If you've never done any research into their organization, they are great. I got to do a kayaking trip with them once. It was very informative. Uh, uh, so these healthy floodplains help foster better recreation opportunities such as fishing, hunting, hiking, camping, boating, trail biking, and more. Fishing and boating is more desirable in clean water surrounded by native vegetation with predictable water levels and thriving wildlife, including fish. Since the dry land bordering water bodies often can't be utilized by humans for much else, they serve as a perfect place for recreation activities like hiking, biking, camping, and wildlife spotting. The tall grasses and reeds, woody brush, and forbs that thrive in floodplains serve as valuable habitat to native ground nesting game birds. Quail, pheasants, prairie chickens, and turkeys all benefit from the habitat and foraging opportunities present in vegetated floodplains. We don't have a lot of wild area in Kansas. A lot of our state is utilized for agriculture. And while that's great for food production, that creates these large areas where there's just no habitat for wildlife. And because riparian forests and riparian wildlife is often a long gallery like this, it essentially creates a road, or what we'll visit in a moment, a wilderness corridor, where these animals can live and migrate and basically have an oasis in the midst of all this agriculture without much native habitat for them. Erratic weather patterns and natural protections. So, lately we've been having some pretty intense weather in Kansas. Uh, it is no stranger to erratic weather patterns, and we have had some especially severe weather events in recent years. Between hot, dry summers, short periods of brutal winter conditions, and then long periods of drought punctuated by major storms, preserving and restoring our floodplains may be one way to soften the blow to communities. I have a few examples here that I'll summarize so I don't read out. Don't want to be too wordy with all of this, but um, these drought conditions, followed by heavy rains, result in increased flooding. Again, the dry, hard soil creates more runoff. Water bodies, damp soil, and plants reduce air temperature, and plants like tall grasses and trees also shade the ground significantly more than turf grass or lawn grass. Erratic winter temperatures can damage vegetation and wildlife by putting them through rapid freeze-thaw cycles and disrupting their life cycles. Wetlands and floodways provide a place for runoff to be retained, That reduces downstream flooding. The roots of those plants create channels for water to sink into the soil. That's important. A lot of our native plants have very deep root channels, which again we'll get into in a minute, and that allows the water a channel to travel down through to soak into the ground. Hot summers bake the ground, especially in paved urban areas, and the stored heat doesn't entirely dissipate at night. This results in what is called the urban heat island effect, which can create temperatures up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher in urban areas than their surroundings. If you have ever gotten out of your car in summer in like a Walmart parking lot, you know exactly what this means. Even at night, the heat baked into that asphalt can still radiate up. And when you amplify that to a whole city full of asphalt and concrete, it gets pretty substantial. The healthier vegetation present in natural floodplains is more resilient against environmental stressors and provides a place for wildlife to take shelter against the elements. Okay, so what can we do? There are several ways that we as a community and as individuals can reap similar benefits to healthy floodplains on a smaller scale. While it is great to preserve those wild areas alongside large rivers and streams, it's not exactly feasible, especially for us as little guys, if we don't have a big community effort, if it's just a neighborhood or a small city or just us in our backyard or our large property. So, practicing conservation and developing nature-based flood mitigation solutions do have significant benefits, even in developed areas and even on a small scale. Conservation in our communities. Here's a picture from Deep Creek. It's a good example uh, of wooded areas alongside a major river outside of a city. There's a good amount of forest out here, good recreation opportunities, but we can't always get that in our small communities. So for native plants, replacing invasive and non-native ornamental plants in gardens, landscaping, and public green spaces with native species benefits the soil, water, wildlife, and more. Permeable paving is a big one. Pavement and ground cover that can be easily penetrated by rainwater is more environmentally friendly than solid pavement or shallow-rooted non-native turf grass. Again, with the runoff, if you have permeable pavement, then it also reduces that uh, that flooding downstream of that. And wilderness corridors and wild hedgerows. I spoke briefly about this. A wilderness corridor is a section of undeveloped land which connects green spaces through developed areas, acting like a bridge for wildlife to cross. It can be dangerous even for birds to cross areas that are big and empty without any shelter. Um, Even animals that can fly can benefit from these wilderness corridors. So native plants. This picture was taken at Tallgrass Prairie. This is compass plant, one of our most big and charismatic native plants here in Kansas, with giant palm-like leaves, huge blooms. It blooms almost all summer and into fall. The roots of native tall grasses, short grasses, and forbs help to aerate compacted soil. I have a little citation here. Big blue stem has 10-foot deep roots. Compass plant, in this picture here, has 15-foot deep roots. Buffalo grass, which is very short. I knew some people who had it as a lawn. My grandmother had it as her lawn. Dense 8-foot deep roots, which is excellent for water absorption when the rain is heavy. And then switchgrass, which I'm sure you might find in any ditch in Kansas, has 10-foot deep roots. It is flood tolerant and drought tolerant. The deep channels dug by these root systems also serve as habitat for soil-dwelling fauna and provide channels for rainwater to soak into the ground. These deep-rooted plants also prevent erosion by providing a structure for the soil to cling to. Just like rebar and concrete, it provides some structure for that sort of soft, malleable soil uh, to hold on to. Native Kansas prairie plants are naturally resistant to the temperature extremes, high winds, and extended periods of drought common in Kansas. Also, things like fire. If you have seen or even taken part in a field burn, the native plants pretty much always spring back up, and it's a good way that we fight against invasives is fire because they tend to not be as resilient as native plants. These native plants provide food and habitat for native pollinators, unlike many non-native ornamental plants, which may not be compatible with local insects. Some flowering plants that we plant in our gardens just are incompatible with native pollinators. You won't see bees or butterflies hanging out on them because they're too far removed. They're not partner species. Here's a diagram of some of our native plants. These are native flowering plants, but grasses are also just as impressive, if not more impressive. Um, I uh, I drew this diagram based off of uh, based off of an infographic on the National Park Service's website. I can send this out if anyone is interested in it, and since it's our resource, I can freely give it away. Um, so I'm not going to read all these out, but again, I can send this out if you're interested and you can take a look. But here we have, this is a 15-foot deep, oops, sorry about that. This is 15 feet on the left here on this measurement. So compass plant and blazing star have roots that dig 15 feet deep. And you saw how tall the compass plant was in that photo. It can be 6 to 10 feet tall if it's especially happy. And then this blazing star, this lead plant, these plants are short. These are scrub brush plants. These won't even come up to your knee, and they have incredibly deep roots. They're excellent landscaping plants, and they're super beneficial for the environment. Okay, so now I would like to potentially request any audience participation. If anyone wants to speak up, feel free to unmute or type in the chat. I would like to ask you, what do these three species here have in common? Anyone can unmute or type. I would appreciate that. Annabelle, do we have any messages in the chat, or should I just move on?
I don't see any right now.
All right, come on, guys. Okay, no worries. These three plants have in common they are invasive. These are very famous, noxious invasives, actually. They grow basically anywhere. If you learn to look for them, you will see them everywhere. Invasive plants are organisms that are not native to the ecosystem which they inhabit. In addition to often being unable to support the native ecosystem, invasive species also risk outcompeting native species. They can present unique risks like increased fire hazard, decreased groundwater absorption, and poor erosion protection compared to native species. In Kansas specifically, our ecosystem has changed dramatically since European colonization. Without seasonal bison grazing and regular controlled burns, the state's native gallery forests have begun to encroach upon its prairies. Eastern red cedar, which is actually native, the state's only native evergreen tree, has begun to behave like an invasive species, creeping into grasslands and risking crown fires where it's taken over woodland edges and hedgerows. Um, an eastern red cedar is what we call an invasive behaving native. It is a otherwise native plant that is treated as an invasive because it has caused these conditions that can be harmful to other species. Permeable surfaces. So here we have a an example of a permeable paving surface. There's grass growing up through these pavers, which also provides, cooling benefits. Um, so paving stones or a concrete lattice paired with ground cover plants are a good option. Gravel is an option. Brick that isn't super watertight, and porous asphalt or pervious concrete. Those are also options. There are companies uh, that make permeable solid pavement. And so some benefits of these is ground cover plants between these pavers do have a cooling effect on the surrounding area. As I mentioned, that urban heat island effect, these plants help to counteract that. Permeability allows water to seep into the ground rather than becoming runoff, which reduces downstream flash flooding and soil erosion. Groundwater absorption helps keep nearby bodies of water becoming too low during dry periods, which was already mentioned. Reduced puddling on surfaces reduces freeze thaw damage and mosquito spawning grounds. Mosquitoes are a big one. Uh, no one, no one likes trying to walk through their garden and becoming a feast. And that freeze thaw can be nasty after the winters that we get in Kansas that are always warm for a week and then bitter cold for a week and even day by day. And then better water and oxygen penetration improves the health of street trees, which provide shade, air purification, and aesthetic value to communities. A lot of street trees struggle to thrive because their roots do need oxygen exchange and water. And when they're underneath a non-permeable surface like that, it can really harm the tree in the long run. They don't tend to live quite as long as trees in non-paved areas. Wilderness corridors and wild hedgerows. I mentioned this briefly before. So, hedgerows on farms, of course, are useful as windbreaks and property dividers, but they also serve as kind of accidental wilderness corridors. Retaining wooded or tall grass populated hedgerows or tree lines on the edges of properties, it reduces flooding downstream by slowing the flow of passing runoff and allowing water a chance to seep into the soil. The tree cover cools the soil and slows evaporation during dry spells. Fully dry soil absorbs water poorly, which causes ponding, erosion, and increased runoff downstream. Wilderness corridors provide varied habitat for local wildlife to thrive, even in developed areas. They also allow uninterrupted travel for migratory species. Again, even bird species benefit from these corridors they can pass through. Stretches of wild growth like these allow wildlife to pass between green spaces, which improve the health of isolated ecosystems. Now we have some nature-based flood mitigation development, things that we can do directly, development we can perform to mimic the benefits of these natural healthy floodplains. So two options are rain gardens and bioswales. A rain garden is a depressed section of landscaping filled with rocks and flood-tolerant plants, which is designed to catch and retain rainwater and runoff. It tends to hold on to that water for a while and then slowly release it. While bioswales are planted drainage areas with an indirect route and water and obstacles for water to pass through, which slow that rate of flow downstream. That also allows groundwater absorption, plant water uptake, and evaporation just because it slows down a bit. Rain gardens. Um, Here are some Johnson County rain gardens. You can see the source there on the bottom right if you'd like to look into that. I again have that cited at the end of the presentation. So a common size for a rain garden is 7 by 10 feet. These shallow depressions catch rainwater and runoff from an area, preventing it from contributing to flooding downstream or ponding in the immediate area. The water is then slowly absorbed into the ground, evaporated, or taken up by plants in the garden. It's important not to place these too close to structures to avoid water seepage into said structures. Rain gardens may overflow, in which case it is important to account for potential overflow and direct it away from structures. These rain gardens are not permanent ponds. They are designed to hold water for a period of time after rain and then evaporate. Because of this, I mentioned mosquitoes before. Because the water does soak down into the soil and evaporate, it doesn't hold on to it long enough generally for mosquito spawning to become an issue. Unless, of course, it's poorly designed, which we try to avoid when building these. Here's an example of a bioswale. This one is in Kansas City, also cited at the end of the presentation. Um, while rain gardens are designed to retain water, bioswales are designed to slow its movement and potentially reduce the total amount of water released downstream by allowing time for ground absorption and plant uptake. Bioswales can be incorporated into drainage ditches, roadside culverts, in landscaping between buildings and beside sidewalks, um, uh, in parks and in road medians. Anywhere where runoff from roads, roofs, etc. can be directed, a bioswale can be utilized. And you can see by this image here, it is essentially a drainage ditch. Well, we have these behind neighborhoods all over the state, just a simple concrete drainage ditch. But instead of just being a paved ditch or a grass ditch that quickly allows the water to pass through, we have rocks, we have plants, we have obstacles to slow that water down and essentially mimic a wild vegetated stream bed. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left, and I would like to give some opportunities for questions and discussion or comments. Um, have any of you used methods in your communities similar to those we have discussed? If not, would you be interested in doing so? And are there any measures your community has taken to restore and protect healthy floodplains or to mimic their conditions not mentioned in the presentation? And you can either unmute to ask a question or comment, or you can type in the chat. Annabelle, if someone does type in the chat, if you could let me know, that would be great. Um, okay. No comments, no questions or anything? Um, well, I set aside this time for that, so maybe we can elaborate on anything if people are missing anything. Um, but aside from that, feel free to unmute or say anything later if you have any questions or any comments, because I'm gonna move on. We have a bit left. Um, we have the community rating system, or CRS. Uh, CRS is the NFIP's voluntary program for recognizing and encouraging community floodplain management activities that exceed the minimum NFIP standards. The community rating system allows communities to pursue risk reduction practices exceeding the minimum NFIP standards and receive discounted flood insurance premiums for residents in exchange. These discounts are calculated by a ranking system that allows communities to earn points and move up on a rank scale, which earns residents greater discounts as they participate in more activities. Um, there are some resources here if you'd like to learn more about CRS. Or again, you can reach out to us here and we can provide you with some resources if need be. Uh, we also have some information on nature-based solutions. Uh, Nature-based solutions are methods of flood mitigation that rely on mimicking or preserving uh, natural conditions. Um, Many of the conservation projects mentioned earlier in the presentation can be considered nature-based solutions. KDA and Stantec have partnered to create a list of nature-based solutions valuable in Kansas, which can be found from this link below. Um, Again, you can also reach out to us. Here are some examples from those nature-based solution reports. We have some infographics as well as some reading that you can look into. Um, and then in conclusion, uh, we have a little summary here. The benefits of conserving and reconstructing natural floodplain areas are significant, but not all areas are suited for floodplain restoration. In these cases, we have options for development that mimic the conditions of natural vegetated floodplains, which includes preserving green space everywhere we can. Um, no measure is too insignificant. Even something as small as leaving up a decade-old tree line between properties can benefit the community and the wildlife in and around it. There are very few spots in Kansas that are public park. We have a lot of private property in this state. So in a lot of instances, if we're going to be doing uh, mitigation or conservation or preservation, that kind of falls on us since we own most of the land in this state. Here's my contact info. Feel free to take that down and reach out if you need me. Um, we have been out of office for the past week, so I have a little bit of a backlog of emails to get back to. If you have reached out to me already regarding something else, I will be back to you soon about that. But if you have any questions about the presentation or anything related, I'm always here. And here are the sources. If anyone is interested, I can send some of these out and you all can take a look at them. See if you're interested in any community projects of bioswales or rain gardens. We have some related to that, as well as just the sources for the information that I got. Um, we do still have about 15 minutes of the presentation's time that was set aside to discuss. Uh, so if there's anything that someone would like me to go over in more detail or anything someone would like to bring up, I would appreciate that. Um, Otherwise, I suppose we could go over the nature-based solutions. Um, but I suppose that's about it. That's what I have for you guys today. Um,
I'm gonna launch the CFM question. Two.
Perfect. Yeah, I was about to bring that up. Yes, we're gonna launch a poll for you guys to answer real quick that Annabelle's gonna put up. Okay, it looks like everyone who is not you or me has now answered the poll, so it should be good. Uh, okay, well, so uh, I suppose that's about it for the presentation, but um, again, if you want any resources or need any information, you have us. Uh, I have, hold on, before you guys leave, let me just pull up my contact info one last time in case you didn't get that. Feel free to reach out to me. I can send you some resources. I can send you the sources from this presentation. If you want that root depth infographic, I am free to hand that out as I wish because I just made that. It's nothing you guys have to, nothing anyone has to go digging for. Um, Other than that, I think we are probably good. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. Um, I don't know if I have much else to share. I think we're done.